This brief video is intended to whet your appetite for learning more about the pyramids. I'm not going to go into great detail about them, but I am going to give you a video that's a few minutes of a few things to think about them. The pyramids seem to have been intended to serve as the ultimate statement of a pharaoh's authority. They're more than just a statement of ego. They gave a permanent place for a pharaoh to be worshipped after they died. This is important in Egypt because that gave the pharaoh's family a permanent call to power, a permanent place where they could rally, where they got an income from the worship of that pharaoh, theoretically forever. Now, there are probably a lot of myths that you've heard about the pyramids. There's stories about how they couldn't have been built, how they're exactly aligned with the constellations or north to south. And the fact is, well, they're not quite that exact. Also, there's been a lot of pseudoscience around the pyramids, and for just a second I'm going to talk a little bit about it, because you get guys like this guy who have been quite popular lately. Not only him, there's these two. This is Erich von Däniken, who's the guy who came up with the idea that pyramids were built by aliens clear back in the 60s. Graham Hancock is next to him, is another not actual academic who studies the pyramids and other ancient sites. Both are authors, both are best-selling authors, which is a little disturbing because their books sell a lot more than any actual credible academic books on pyramids. But nonetheless, they both serve as, well, kind of a foil for academics. They're constantly challenging what academics say about the ancient world, and there is actually a place for that. You see, in the old days, and by the old days I mean 5 years ago, we had a very simple picture of how the pyramids were built. And we had a very simple timeline that said, starting about 4,000 years ago, people could get together enough to build large structures. And that made sense until 1996, when a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt found a site called Göbekli Tepe. It's tentatively dated at 11,000 BCE. It's an inhospitable place, and it's older, as far as we can tell, it's older than writing, metalwork, cities, agriculture, villages, or in fact the ability of humans to just stay in one place for more than a few weeks at a time. It's really, really old, and yet it shows signs of relatively advanced construction. The stones are finely worked, the artwork is well done. It's a complete mystery. And it happens to line up with the time frame that particularly Graham Hancock, who doesn't say it was aliens, he thinks it's people who escaped from Atlantis. Yep, Atlantis. Well, anyway, he thought Atlantis sank around 11,000 BCE, and partly because of him, and he's not the only person who holds this theory, it's actually an old theory from a group called the Theosophical Society, which is over 130 years old at this point. Anyway, this pseudoscientific theory has been constantly looking around for things that are roughly 10,000 BCE, or 12 or 13,000 years old. And then there's Göbekli Tepe. Does it mean they're right? No. But there is something useful about people looking around in places that traditional archaeologists aren't. And the fact is, there seems to be a pretty clear evolution for pyramids in Egypt. First, you had mastabas. These were brick burial places made of mud bricks. They're about 30 feet tall. And the more important, the more important a person was, the taller their mastaba. Late in the era of pre-dynastic era, they began putting two mastaba on top of each other. So we'd go up, and then you'd have kind of a step, and then a second mastaba, because you can only make it so high before it's too heavy and it will shatter the bricks on the bottom. And there's failed pyramids. They're not always perfect. This is one of the oldest pyramids, and its outer facing collapsed. The Great Pyramid, well, it's hard to tell how exact it is because the entire outer face has been stolen to build buildings in downtown Cairo. So when people say it's exactly right to the nearest inch, how would we know? There's meters of stone, in some places tens of meters of stone, missing. Now, the interior of the Great Pyramid does have a fairly mysterious set of chambers and passages. Recent examinations using radar and thermal imaging have indicated there might be more that we don't know about. So this is still a living thing that we're finding out more about all the time. Now, the pyramids also served a political purpose. It's a huge permanent spot that says the pharaoh was powerful enough to mobilize vast numbers of people necessary to build the large building. Also, in the temporary, in the more immediate time of building the pyramid, it was useful. We have a number of things written by people who actually worked on the pyramid. That's one of the ways we know it's not too mysterious. We have a pretty good idea of when they were built. We know, for example, that the people who worked on the pyramid were young men and women from the peasant class, that's the serfs, in the off-season. You always had a time in Egypt where the poor were left without any work to do. And traditionally, they just kind of hung around and got in trouble. Now, technically, farmers in Egypt didn't own anything, so they're paid by the pharaoh. And what the pharaoh would do was he could gather a tremendous number of people to work on projects simply by offering them extra food and beer. Basically, he threw a giant party. Young men came and worked very hard, moving stone during the day, in the rainy season when they couldn't be working in the fields, and at night they partied, and this served a purpose of moving people around within Egypt. It allowed young men to get out of their village and meet young women who they could later marry. And basically also solidified the loyalty of the public on a very low level to the pharaoh. And then it gives you this hierarchy set literally in stone. So even in death, the pharaoh could tower over others. Now, there are some complications to this story being so simple. One is, we don't know a lot of details about exactly how the pyramid was built. There are a lot of tricks you can use to move very large stones. Wetting down sand and using it to slide stones, for example, has been shown to work. Also, there's a technique where you can, using a single board, walk enormous stones with a very small number of people relatively quickly and up relatively sharp inclines, simply by rocking them back and forth. And there have been a number of structures found on the Giza Plateau that might have been used in building the pyramids. But there's too many structures on the Giza Plateau. It's incredibly complicated and old and, well, has been occupied for 5,000 years. And also there appear to have been some repairs, fairly major repairs, on the pyramids in the ancient world. That makes sense, though. For more than 1,000 years, these were living, breathing businesses, making money, for bringing people in. It only makes sense that maintenance work, even some high-level maintenance work, would have been taken to keep them in truly good condition. Then there's the problem of the Sphinx. It's unsure when it was built or by who. Old pictures of it show holes, what look like tunnels and doors in the body of the Sphinx, which could easily be bored by treasure seekers who are looking for treasure that was rumored to be in the Sphinx. But we don't have anything, no one wrote in the ancient world about the Sphinx. We don't know who built it or why, or whose face it's supposed to be, or exactly what it is. And there's some signs that that may not be the original face. That may have actually been an ancient reconstruction or an ancient restoration of an even older statue. Some geologists, for example, think that it's a lot older than the pyramid, with fantastic numbers of 5,000 years older than the pyramids, or 10,000 years older, or in one case, one person claimed 130,000 years older. Whatever the case, the Sphinx is an anomaly. And by the way, one thing we can say for sure is Napoleon did not shoot off its nose. He was quite upset when he found it, and yes, he did. It had been buried for almost 2,000 years at that point. When he found it and it was missing its nose. Noses simply fall off of statues a lot. It's a natural weak point. You're going to see a lot of statues in this class from the ancient world and even up through the medieval world, not that old, that are missing their noses. Just happens. So, hopefully, this whets your appetite a little bit for pyramids. They could be a good topic for a little research, as long as you stay with the academic sources and not the Graham Hancocks of the world. If you have any questions, feel free to send them to me. You know my email.